Hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My guest today is Kathy Guzman Galloway, who's got 20 years in the consumer packaged goods industry, a deep subject matter expert, awesome person in addition, because I told her I would include that. It's on her bio. No, I'm just kidding. Really a deep experience. And Kathy, I'm just excited to have you on the show today. How are you?
Thank you. I'm excited to be here too. Can't wait to find out how awesome you are. So
well, I'll try not to share too much about that because today is about you. We talked in the pre-show. Your ideal client is 100 to under $1 billion in revenue. Consumer packaged goods in itself as an industry, highly scalable, highly global. You've been doing this, your entire career. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you, and then we'll get into some questions about, what you've learned in your time in the industry.
In my years of wisdom, yes. So I started my career right out of business school. I'm actually originally from the East Coast, New Jersey, born and raised. But came to University of Texas at Austin to get my MBA, and then PepsiCo recruited me into the Frito-Lay division here in Dallas. I've been here ever since, 20 plus years that I've been in the Dallas area. At the time, it was really a tough role. I mean, anybody who works at a large Fortune 1000 company that is really a global organization and you are brand spanking new into the world of business, man, you get beat up. You really get beat up. It's such a fast-paced environment. And on the other side of that almost 9-year experience, what I have learned is that the baseline fundamentals of traditional, classically run CPG brand management organization have been instrumental in just everything I've ever done. So anybody listening who's suffering through surviving in that kind of environment, just know that it pays off. And that experience, that work led to a number of other roles in very small organizations, a small mom and pop shop that was selling beauty products, all the way to Dean Foods, which is one of the largest milk manufacturers in the country, and at the time had a number of brands under them. Got a chance to work under that. And then eventually made my way into consulting. I had young kids at the time. I wanted flexibility. I thought it was going to be temporary. It's been 11 years, going on 12 years, and been just phenomenally greater than what I could have expected for myself, mostly because I've had an opportunity, as you've said, to just build an expertise in one area that not only am I good at, thankfully, but also I really love to do. And maybe more importantly, is really needed. Is really needed because brand positioning and being able to communicate about your business effectively never dies. That is a task that we will need to do until business is no longer a thing for the world. So that's the shortest version of my experience.
Awesome. So you highlighted, and you have a dog. So you highlighted.
Yes, if you can hear him, I apologize.
No problem. Yeah, Fortune 1000 company, and you also, smaller businesses. What would you say in your experience, and of course, over the decade in consulting, what would you say are the chief differences or considerations between, call it a smaller, growing business versus a consumer packaged goods business that might be considered in more mature? What are the key considerations in terms of supporting the brand, supporting the the overall strategy?
Yeah, under 100 million, there are actually two types of businesses I've discovered. There's super small, really, you don't even know what you don't know, and it's really difficult to wrap your head around the things you're not even aware of yet. So hard to help them. Then there's the 5 million to 100 million. The things that they're really struggling with is trying to figure out how to get out of the starter mindset. How do I stop being a startup and start thinking like a big brand? Once you cross that 100 million mark, for all intents and purposes, you've made it. 100 million is a great successful number. And now the game really gets serious. Now the game is played in fractions. And what we are working with once you're in that larger playing field is we've nailed the table stakes. I could not have made it this far if I did not nail the table stakes. If I'm a beverage, it tastes good. If I'm a potato chip, it's crispy. If I'm a household cleaner, it definitely kills germs. Now we're in a game of what is different, meaningfully different between myself and the thing sitting right next to me on the shelf. And when I say you're living in fractions, what I mean is that now you're down to the very specific things that drive consumer behavior. These are going to be the both conscious and unconscious drivers that make me choose one brand or one product over another. And the hardest part about that, I think, particularly for brands coming out of the 100 million, inching towards 300, 400 million, is you don't realize how much you really need to spend time with the consumer to answer the questions. We can't make this up. You gotta find out from the consumer. And I think that shift is really hard for brands that just haven't spent money on research and that kind of work. It's new for them. It's tough.
So just to go back, and thank you for that. So what I hear is, once you get that table stakes, obviously the product has to be good. And then I imagine, the base brand, distribution, sales, like availability, you have, you gained X amount of market share, you've got stable shelf space, you're not going anywhere, so to speak.
Right,
and then now
right.
you're really trying to capture as much market share. So that's kind of like phase one. Phase two is then really deeply understanding your customer, what drives them, what makes a difference to them. And I say this, for you as a listener, you might not be in the consumer packaged goods because it's a kind of smaller playing field, but I think that there's key things to take away. So what are some of those questions that our leaders might be asking themselves about their customer such that they could improve their brand and improve the, let's call it, attractiveness of their product?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to build quickly on something you said a moment ago about the things that they are doing, that they've been doing consistently and effectively before they get to this point in time. I call that all block and tackle. That's basically table stakes, not only to the consumer, but to the industry. If you don't have sufficient distribution, you've done nothing. If your price point isn't correct, you've done nothing, right? So there's all of these things, these hurdles you got to surpass. When you get to this point, the things that are becoming glaringly obvious that are a problem to solve in order to accelerate growth past this point I'm in now, right? Now we're fighting for 1, 2, 3 points of margin. For me to accelerate past that, I've got to be able to answer the questions that I really haven't been able to answer before and didn't really seem to matter. I'll give you an example of a brand that I've worked with. They're in the food space. They sell snacks that are primarily for kids, but more an all-family solution. And in the category they serve, they've spent literally decades by the time I got to them. They had literally been spending decades working through communication that was all about good quality, simple ingredients. Great. 10 years ago, that definitely did what it needed to do for you. That was something consumers were alert to. We were talking and thinking a lot about processed food versus simple food, and that did the work it needed to do. Enter 2, 3, 4 other fairly new competitors, and this brand is over 100 years old, right? So here enter a slew of new competitors over the last 10 years. They're not talking about that. And I'm wondering, why are they not talking about simple quality ingredients? And I am, and they're stealing share. But I've done work before to know that consumers care about simple ingredients. I mean, I have the proof. The proof is in the $500 million worth of sales. So what is up? I think that's where you start to really question, what is it that they know that I don't? The benefit that a lot of quote unquote new brands, and by new brands I don't mean startup founders that are disrupting in an industry. Absolutely, they've got something different that they bring to the table. But brands that are larger, maybe come from a large conglomerate that are well funded, they're doing the work to come in and steal your share or to effectively compete with whoever's in that space. They know things that I don't know. And the fact that it's working is a clue. I've got to go back and figure out what is it about what they are offering that feels compelling to a consumer. That would be my very first clue. Someone is saying things that I'm not saying and I don't know why it's working. Even if I do know that it's working, how do I then take that and leverage it for my own brand? Right? I don't want to be a copycat, but I want to understand that implication for what does that mean for my brand. That would be one of those.
I can't help but think of like the idea of this, like the amount of competition. Like when you're getting into this space, there is a finite total addressable market. Most of the time you're in a red ocean. Let's say there's a bunch of competitors. Of course, there's going to be new products that get created, like a Prime or like a, I don't know, Blueberry Faygo or whatever, you know. But then you're starting to get into this place where there's intense competition. Your ability to connect to the consumer, provide some level of differentiation. And what I found interesting out of what you shared is because of the changes in demographics, psychographics, markets, how people are buying, that all of those things impact how you need to position your product. And again, you said brand most likely, or most of the time, and then there's of course like sub products, categories, etc. And then what I heard as an undertone is the adaptability of a brand to not get complacent on what they think they know. And it sounds like being able to do that proactively versus reactively, because I think it's probably really easy to figure out when someone's eating your lunch competitively versus, hey, how do I stay on top of this? What's your experience, thoughts on that?
Yes, I appreciate you saying that, because I preach a lot about the fact that the work of brand positioning is literally never done. The reason it's never done is because the world is consistently changing. You don't live in a year. We're not always going to live in 2024 for the rest of eternity. The world is changing. All the things you talked about. Yes, the consumers' desires and needs change. Demographics are changing. But what is also changing is that those startup founders I mentioned and competitors at any level, they also are bringing new products to the market that are driving changes in perceptions, driving changes in preferences. And not being on top of that is absolutely a very easy way to fall down a rabbit hole. And what I've discovered, for the larger the brand gets, so once you're north of 500 million, the more difficult it is for you to stay on top of that. Not because you're not investing in learning. I find often that they get it. They get the trends. They get what's happening in the space. What they're unable to do is move the ship fast enough to catch up with the world today, which for those of us under 500 million, what an opportunity. What an opportunity for a $200 million brand to say, I need to be on top of this consumer at all times, so that as soon as there's an opportunity, I'm going to run with it right away. And the spirit and the idea of test and learn that a lot of startup founders have brought to the world of innovation is one that we should start to think more about, so that we don't get into that position where, okay, it's too late. Sure, you're launching this now. We've been talking about that for 2 years. We're on to something else, right?
And what's just so interesting about that is, of course, you have these big brands that are, typically slow to move. Then you have an industry, most industries, but in this industry, the barrier to entry over the past, let's call it decade, has decreased significantly. And what's actually selling, in my humble opinion, isn't necessarily the product. Because you have, take Prime, again, you have the Mr. Beast chocolate bars, you have like Kylie Cosmetics, where you have the Doves, the Estee Lauders that are, pooping their pants or whatever you want to call it. And it's really about being able to monetize your audience, monetize the probably emotional, social connectivity, the aspiration piece to it, with a product that's also high quality. So, as I look, we're recording this in 2024, you could probably start up a product business very, very fast through drop shipping, through suppliers, through white labels. Let's say an organization was trying to spin up a new product. What would be the key considerations, and they could grow it to 100 million. What would be the key considerations for them kind of off the top starting today, and I usually frame it in terms of what are the things that they would have wished they knew when they were getting started, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I assume by that you mean, a mid-market sized company wanting to launch something new.
Well, I mean, even
versus
if,
a startup, like a startup, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference is a really good distinction. So just kind of the way I think about it, there are big people with big audiences. They might not necessarily be in consumer packaged goods. They could start something up. Or let's say they are in consumer packaged goods. Maybe they're launching a new product. Hopefully it is the same thing.
I got you. So I think what's so tricky about that is that, like everything, we're on a downturn. And the downturn is, as a consumer, been there, done that. 75% of celebrities have got something. And so the shiny new thing that a celebrity is selling something isn't enough anymore. And that's true for just about everything that was fun and shiny in the last 10 years, right? Even the startup founder story, which this is not unique to the consumer packaged goods world. This is true in tech and certainly in fintech. In a lot of spaces, it is true that the startup founder trend, for lack of a better word, that probably started about the 10-year mark, brought in a wave of deep concern, as it should have, and a real wake-up call to large brands to say it isn't enough for you to do a survey of 500 people and ask them what they want and poof, launch a product. What the startup founder brought to the world is a perspective of really being not only empathetic about that consumer or customer experience, but also understanding it firsthand. That there is a need for me to put myself in their shoes to understand why they need what they need. And that's something that traditionally, large brands, and by large I mean 100 million plus, it's just not something you do because it's not cost efficient, because it's not the way we work, because there are a lot of research vendors out there that are just selling, research. We're just doing research to do research versus really uncovering what is happening with that consumer and who are they beyond this experience. So if I'm launching a new product, I need to kind of understand why the consumer would choose this beyond the fact that somebody's name is on it. Prime is a unique example that I don't love using often.
Yeah.
Because it is a phenomenon that you can't replicate it. There's so many unique layers in how that came to market and why it's successful that it really is an anomaly, right?
It's an outlier, yeah.
It really is just such an outlier. And it was bothersome to me because so many people come to that. Because we want what is it that I need to do? Do I just need to go get a YouTuber and sell this thing? Like, is that the secret? No, that's not actually the secret. It's hard to replicate. So again, I think everything you'll ever hear me say is always going to bring people back to what does the consumer want? What does the consumer say? What is it that they're looking for? Why are they looking for it? What is it that's not working for them today? And then even what beyond that specific product experience, take Prime, for example, as a hydration beverage, beyond drinking a beverage that helps when I'm sweaty, why am I sweating? Why do you need this? Do you drink it when you're not sweaty? And what are you drinking otherwise? And what is it about this flavor that matches that occasion? Right? Really peeling the onion to understand what's underneath there, I think, is what startup founders naturally have because they are users of the product themselves. They themselves are solving a problem they have. You don't really do that in corporate. And that's a gap for sure.
Absolutely. And one of the things that just made me think of this is, the Feastables brands, Kylie, and again, these are like influencer brands versus kind of blue chip consumer packaged goods, brands that you would know. There's a difference between, are you going to see Prime on shelves in 10 years? Whereas you think of something like Frito-Lay or Pepsi or Coke or any of those things that have literally been around for decades. The other thing that made me think of is, I get all of my news from social media, and there's the story of the janitor who came up with, the flaming hot, the spicy chip because, he's like, hey, my community doesn't have their flavors represented in this market. So distinct from like, hey, there's a market opportunity or I have a hypothesis, it's, hey, these people want this. There's a gap in the market. How can we create that? And with the amount of products out there, it's sometimes hard to imagine that there's something new. But of course, if you're curious enough, if you have the understanding and the connection enough, there's an opportunity. Kathy, just as we finish up here, what is the one thing that you want our listeners to know about developing, a successful brand in the food and beverage industry? What is something that you, common advice or at least common mistakes to avoid?
Yeah, I think it's in line with what I've already said, that the work of understanding your consumer, the work of brand positioning, the brand development, it is never over. If you think you did something last year and you feel great about this research project, we worked on positioning, we have this document, great, I've done what I needed to do, that you're fooling yourself, because that is a continuous evolution. And along with that, the feedback I have is, particularly for those brands that are on the earlier part of that 100 million plus mark, so anywhere between 100 and 300 million, is don't wait to invest in learning about your audience. Don't wait. And there are so many ways to do that, particularly in the world of AI that we live in today. You can get a lot of rich data for free, and you can get a lot of rich data for $500,000 and everything in between. So don't wait. Do the work of asking the questions, and that's going to keep you ahead of the curve.
Awesome. I love that. Kathy, where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work? Where can they work with you if they want?
Absolutely. The easiest way to find me is at theclaritywizard.com/podcast. But I'm also really active on LinkedIn. You can just go in and search for my name, Kathy Guzman Galloway. And you'll find a bunch of stuff there, including my newsletter, if you'd like to subscribe to that and stay on top of positioning trends.
Awesome. I love that. It's a job that's never done, and it's always getting harder. So it's good for a consultant in that industry, challenging for brands, but it also a tremendous opportunity to connect with your customer and really make sure you're doing something of value. So Kathy, thanks so much for being here today. I appreciate the chat and appreciate you sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you for having me.
Folks, this has been the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. Thank you, Kathy Guzman Galloway. There are many Kathy Galloways, but only one Kathy Guzman Galloway, going right back to brand. One of the things I'm taking away from today's conversation is it's not just for CPG products, but really everybody. At the heart of a good product, the heart of a good service is understanding what it does for the customer, why they need it, and how did they get into that problem in the first place. Especially those organizations and technology or otherwise are saying, hey, I'm going to create a new product. It's like, well, does anybody need a new product? Or rather, do they need a solution to an existing problem? And the only way you can find the right solution is by asking the customer. So what can you do to be curious about your customer, whether that's getting some free data or doing some market research? The job's never done. So folks, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I hope this gives you a couple things to chew on, pun intended. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.